Hello and welcome to Rogue Insights here on Prime Rogue Inc. We'd love it if you would drop us a subscribe, hit the notification button, like, share this with a friend, frenemy, whatever. Today we're talking theory and practice together. We're going to be talking about the security dilemma, the spiral model, as well as its application in relation to a few ongoing global conflicts like the one in the Middle East and the one involving Ukraine and Russia. At the baseline, the security dilemma, which is something I used to teach when I taught university, basically arises mostly inadvertently in anarchy, which is the state of the international system without central governance, when one state, in attempting to increase its own security, maybe by buying weapons, building a new tank, something qualitative or quantitative, will, or even making an alliance, just creating a new alliance structure, will make another state in the system insecure. So that state's going to respond by one-upping it, making a bigger alliance, building better tanks. And this is just going to create a vicious cycle of miscomprehension by which they're going to eventually, potentially, wind up in conflict. Now, when we talk about the security dilemma, we need to take into account the fact that it can be contrived. States are aware, but can play dumb, that no, this is not being used against us. These defensive missile batteries that were just inaugurated by country X are a defensive weapon, purely defensive. But we're really threatened now. So these can be played up, and this has been done, and I'll discuss this a bit in the meantime. But let's talk about the security dilemma, and great books on this down in the description below. We've got The Security Dilemma, Fear and Cooperation in World Politics by Booth and Wheeler, Jervis's original work, etc. But the core concept is rooted in anarchy. That's the fact that the international system does not have any central governance structure. You can't call the world police when you get attacked. So it's a self-help system. States have to fend for themselves. So basically, if you're fending for yourself, anything you do to secure yourself might threaten someone else. So imagine we don't have police, and your neighbor, whom you don't get along with, sees you buy a big rifle. Well, he might just buy two so that he and his son can shoot at you. And if he buys two and you find out you might buy three, then the whole family on the other side is going to have a rifle. And at some point, you're going to end up shooting each other. That's kind of the point of what the security dilemma is like. It's miscalculation, miscomprehension leading to conflict in this self-help anarchic system. And this is mostly a realist theory, although liberals do delve into it. But defensive realists suggest that the security dilemma can be managed when states act truly defensively. So if they build fortifications, barriers, defensive weapon systems, rather than offensive weapons, say, mobile infantry brigades, not a big deal. Offensive realists, on the other hand, like John Mearsheimer, suggest that states can't ever be certain if another state is truly being honest with its intentions or even what it can use the weapon for. So as such, the security dilemma cannot be mitigated. It's unavoidable because states are always going to accumulate as much power as possible. So, we have to take into account that not all situations escalate in the same way. The severity of the security dilemma will depend on a variety of factors, the history between the states, the offense-defense balance. To think about that, it's whether offensive weapons or defensive weapons are dominant during a given time period. If we look at World War I, when the machine gun emerged and trench warfare emerged, defense was on the dominance. World War II, the tank and blitzkrieg, offense was on the dominance. So that's one factor that determines the nature of the security dilemma, whether offensive or defensive strategies are easier to implement. If defensive strategies are easier to implement, it's easier to mitigate against the security dilemma. Although there can be misperception, like there was in World War II, when they thought defense had the superior position because of the machine gun, but then the Germans invented blitzkrieg, right? So just went around the line. But if we want a real-world example of the security dilemma in action, we just go back to World War II, the alliances that preceded it before the war. Germany was seeking security through military strength, and basically it created a bunch of alliances that sparked the assassination of Archduke Franz Ferdinand. The British, the French, they all came together. So these mutual alliance patterns collided, and boom, war. That's a simplified version of the security dilemma at a large scale. If we apply this to the Ukraine conflict, which a lot of theorists, including Mearsheimer, have done, and again, his book, The Tragedy of the Great Power Politics, is down in the description, we can see a potential reason why Russia might justify its invasion of Ukraine. Throughout the post-Cold War period, NATO has focused really heavily on eastward expansion as these former constituent states of the Soviet Union have become quasi-democratic. Moscow has said that it perceives this as a threat. It said that it was promised this would never happen at the end of the Cold War. So it's responded. The 2014 annexation of Crimea is seen through this lens as Russia's response to encroachment by the West. And arguably, the 2022 invasion is seen as an even more significant gesture of quote-unquote protest of NATO expansion when viewed through this lens. Now, if we look at the current situation in Ukraine, where Ukraine's military force has actually been bolstered since the invasion began, for example, Western military aid has brought Abrams tanks, HIMARS rocket launchers, Leopard 2s, a modern NATO standard military. This could potentially, especially if Russia is not being an honest broker, lead to a further round of escalation, because if Ukraine is promised eventual NATO membership, NATO will be literally on Russia's border next to its warm water ports. So this is, and I'm not saying that I agree with this perception or this interpretation, but this is an interpretation that's out there, notably by Mearsheimer and other realists, and it's a legitimate one. I don't see it that way, but it is a real one. And if we look at Russia's decision to deploy tactical nuclear weapons to Belarus in 2023, it's basically a direct response to what's been happening in Ukraine in terms of Western support or NATO support for Ukraine. So what we see here is this regional security dilemma potentially growing global consequences, right? So with the Ukraine war triggering food instability, like sunflower oil shortages, just a bunch of different stuff, gas and oil disruptions, etc., a bit of an energy crisis, 24,000 civilian casualties, hundreds of thousands of dead. We've seen arms buildups in Poland and throughout Eastern Europe. Some states in NATO are kind of chomping at the bit to go after Russia. The Poles are like a Belgian Malinois, like a land shark, if you will. I'll get into that in another episode because Poland's a really interesting case in NATO right now. But there is the potential for more escalation based on this same security dilemma model. Now, if we look at the Israel-Hamas conflict and the security dilemma as it's ongoing in the Middle East right now, as we wait for Israel to retaliate against Iran, hell, they might be doing it right now as far as I know. It's 2:10 p.m. on the 9th here in Calgary, 9th of October. The security dilemma is clear in Israel's military strategies and the manner it's reacted since the October 7th attack. Israel has sought to neutralize the threat posed by Hamas, first by bombing the living hell out of Gaza, and now by engaging in targeted assassination strikes against Hamas leaders, against Hezbollah leaders, and now this supposed limited invasion of southern Lebanon, which I'm not sure is going to be that limited. In this context, we see other actors, regional ones and non-regional ones, positioning themselves. Now, taking into account what Russia is doing in relation to Ukraine and how Israel is allied with the United States and the other Western democracies, Russia has met with Hamas leaders. It's met with Iran, enemies of Israel, even though it's historically been pro-Israel, not to directly challenge Israel per se, but to challenge the United States and its influence and its status as a power broker in the Middle East. So kind of like a proxy upon a proxy. So Israel sees these things as necessary for its security, although in yesterday's video, which I'll link in the description below, we got into a cynical perspective on why this might be misleading. Whatever Israel does is likely to escalate the conflict further, whether it's because of the actions of actors in the region or because of the actions of actors abroad. But what we're looking at really is overlapping, interconnected geopolitical consequences. So if we look at the Ukrainian diplomatic balancing act becoming more complex as it supports Israel, all the while Russia is edging towards supporting Iran, we have this like sort of proxy conflict in the Middle East, or potential proxy conflict. with U.S. and Russia involvement, the U.S. is basically engaged on two fronts. It's supporting Israel and Ukraine, so it's stretching U.S. resources and strategic focus thin, potentially going to limit its ability to influence outcomes in other theaters or contexts. At the same time, Russia is supporting anti-Western actors in the Middle East, continuing its war in Ukraine, and if it aims to weaken Western influence across multiple regions simultaneously, it might see an escalation of the aid that the Western democracies are providing to Ukraine. So it's this vicious cycle again and again that we just see repeating itself. And, you know, this does have broader implications and future risks. The Israel-Hamas conflict could escalate into a regional wider war involving Iran. We're about to see what Israel is going to respond to Iran with after that large-scale Iranian missile attack. If this goes tit for tat, and even though Israel is a superior military force, we have no idea what the Gulf countries are going to do. At least Turkey is a wild card. Saudi Arabia is going to side with the Israelis unless something crazy happens. So is Jordan. But there are some wild cards. You never know. Qatar is another wild card. Qatar is... we have to do an episode on Qatar one day. Qatar is like the most devious actor after Israel in the Middle East. I need to write this down and do an episode on Qatar, because Qatar is next level stuff for that small of a country. But, you know, as America is facing a global decline in its power simultaneous to China's rise, and as it maintains all these alliance structures, which are partially degrading itself, it's bogging itself down in the Middle East, supporting Israel and Ukraine. Israel's not even taking Biden's calls, except today it finally did, but I digress. So what we're seeing is a need for mitigation strategies, confidence-building measures like ceasefires, arms control negotiations, multilateral frameworks with inspections. Those work really well. Kidding. But long-term diplomatic engagement through multilateralism is probably the key to simultaneously meeting the security concerns of the East and the West, of Russia and of America. That said, the will to have a meeting of the minds regarding this does not appear to be present, which is why it is very likely that the security dilemma in the spiral model, where actor A distrusts B and acquires power for defense, B interprets A's actions as offensive, B moves on to acquire its own power for its own defense, and A interprets B's actions as confirming its initial basis for mistrust. This vicious cycle is likely to keep going ad infinitum. In other words, forever. The worst case scenario, as it was seen in the Cold War, was this ending with nuclear war. At the time, you know, there were people that thought that the war in Vietnam or the war in Korea could end with nuclear war because of this exact model. Now, I'm not suggesting that at all, because for many reasons, but the China dynamics are some of them. But let's see what Israel is going to do to respond to the Iranian attack. I still think they're going to try to pull on the proverbial leash that the Biden administration is trying to impose on them, but only time will tell. We should know shortly. We might even know today. That's my inkling, but I could be wrong. Anyway, again, check out the book links in the description below. Please drop us a like, a subscribe, share this with a friend, an enemy, a frenemy, any type of human or non-human entity that is capable of reading or natural language processing. My name is Kevin Duska from Prime Rogue Inc. It is 2:16 p.m. here in Calgary on the 9th of October, 2024. Thank you and have a wonderful, wonderful day.